Hello, my name is Steve D'Agostino, and my co-host Anna Fernald and I welcome you to the Twice Over podcast, because to teach is to learn twice over. In this episode, there's a hub for that. We introduce the theme for Season 4, leadership. We consider the questions, what does the future of higher education leadership look like? And who's best placed to lead colleges and universities as technology becomes more integral?
We're back for a new season of the Twice Over podcast. We're so excited to be here. And as we've done every season before, we have a new big bad for you. We are talking about leadership this season. So Steve, I'm so happy to be back here with you. And I'm super psyched about this theme. Of course, it's a presidential election year, so naturally a lot of us are thinking about leadership, but you had some more local to higher education reasons why you thought leadership would be a good topic for us. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're hoping we can cover this season?
I've been attending a series of conferences for IT and higher education, and it's given me a different perspective on how the university appears to people who work there and are deeply committed to higher education, but are not what we would call academics. They don't teach, they're not in the knowledge creation and dissemination business, as it were. But without their participation, the modern or the contemporary university couldn't work. Everything we do is technologically mediated. There's this technological layer. It's funny, today I drove in instead of taking the train, and I wanted to park in the parking lot, and there was no one there.
Oh,
This big,
wow.
sort of big, I forget what you call it. It's the black and white sort of design. You have to scan your phone,
Oh, a QR code.
a QR code, to open an app or open
Oh
a
my
web
goodness.
page. So it opens this web page. I have to enter all of this information about myself and my vehicle, and I leave my car there. I realized that there was an attendant there, but he was helping someone else. So he was no longer parking cars, he was rendering IT support.
Helping
I
people
waited,
understand this app.
and I just really wanted to park my car. It's like going to the supermarket. You go to the supermarket and there's someone who you could tell, if you're in the self-checkout, if they are of a certain demographic, this is going to take a while, right?
Indeed.
So I was there the other day. This person was trying to buy an onion, and the onion had no bar to scan, and they couldn't figure this out. The guy behind me starts yelling, "It's an onion!" I'm like, as if that
Which
would
is
be
really
helpful.
helpful.
Exactly. She seemed aware. She did select it out of the mass of available produce, right? So I'm assuming she knew what this was. So she asked for some person that worked at the store to help her. And this was seen by everyone waiting online as an egregious violation.
Right.
Let's imagine that sort of inversion for a moment. I go to the store. We no longer expect a relationship with my local market. It would be weird to have such a relationship. Whoever conceptualized a shopper imagines that this person wants to go into the store, get their stuff, buy it, and leave with no human interaction. And I think this assumption is beginning to permeate at least the market. So why is this relevant? Why am I talking about this? As a person who spends a lot of time thinking about the integration of technology into teaching and learning, I've begun to notice, perhaps a little bit late, the integration of technology into everything. That there is this technological layer that mediates many kinds of interactions, and there are effects. This relates to our big bad, as it were, this semester, because university life is becoming technologically mediated, both in and outside of the classroom. The student hub is an example. Instead of
Okay.
visiting the financial aid office, I will work on this app.
Right.
My relationship is with this app, not a person in the financial aid office or in the bursar, or however that might work. Let me ask you, if a person wanted to become like a provost or a vice president
Hmm.
in the academic side of the university, how would they go about doing that?
So the normal order or the typical order of ascending into administration begins with becoming a department chair and then some kind of role in the dean's office. And you don't always have to go stepwise, right? Sometimes people move from assistant to associate to full dean. But sometimes, depending on the size of the institution and the leadership needs of the institution, people go straight from being department chair to being a dean. For example, if you're chair of a large department and you have a good relationship with the dean and that dean retires, you might be a very strong inside candidate for the dean role and never have to be associate dean. But normally those are the steps. And then from the deans are typically in academic leadership, as I understand it, right below the vice presidential level. Here at Fordham, the provost is the kind of super vice president, but he's technically at the vice presidential level. The way that ranks work differ and titles work differently, but the provost is the chief academic officer of the university. And typically the provost is imagined as kind of standing over all the deans of all the different schools, depending on how many different schools your university has. So if you're a university, you might have a medical school, a law school, a business school, social work, grad ed. We don't have a medical school here at Fordham, but we have a liberal arts college and a liberal arts graduate school. So the provost is the chief academic officer, and that's the standard trajectory. And it means provosts can come from any one of a number of disciplines, but those disciplines tend to be, almost always are, correlated with traditional academic departments. So you get your training, like our current provost here at Fordham is a chemist. So there was a moment in his career when most of what he was studying was chemistry. And then he shifted to learn, probably, I presume, because this is true of most academic leaders, on the job and in the summer at leadership conferences and seminars and workshops, how to be an academic leader. But it's not at all typical for provosts and deans to have studied deaning as their graduate degree. Usually they've come out of sociology or English or chemistry or some department that we recognize as a potential major in college, right?
So what would someone at that level, not our provost in particular, but just
Right.
a person in the leadership on the academic side of an institution, what would they see? What would they care about the most?
Well, they care about the faculty and they care about the health of the schools that they're overseeing. So things like enrollment, do we have enough students? Are they the kind of student that we're seeking to attract? They might talk with admissions about marketing and questions of where are we advertising, where are we recruiting? They might be very involved in questions of retention for students, and then very involved in faculty and thinking about faculty well-being, faculty recruitment, our faculty research profiles at the level that we want, our faculty getting the grants and awards that match our sense of ourselves as an institution. Are we an institution that cares a lot about teaching and the well-being of first-generation students? Are we an institution that is avid for major grant money? Are we an institution that wants to rack up Fulbrights and Guggenheims and Nobel Prizes, right? And so Provost is trying to figure out all of that stuff. And sometimes the provost can be in tension with the non-academic side, which is everything else, which is the buildings, the computers, the athletics, even in some cases, the library, even though the library probably falls under the provost's office, landscaping. So there's a little bit of, certainly, there can be a little bit of tension between a provost side who they often see themselves, and as a faculty member, I share this perspective, sometimes as we're doing the meat and potatoes of what colleges do. We're doing the teaching and learning. We're in charge of the classroom. And there's all this other stuff that we need to make universities run that costs money and that has to be there, but that feels to be
Extra.
a secondary maybe,
Yeah.
or in a supporting role of the reading and writing and laboratory work of a faculty member.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That's very clear. I guess I want to take a turn now and try to put these two conversations together, right? This idea of the technological layer that's existing in society, in the
Yep.
supermarket, say, or in the parking lot, and how we begin to experience life at the university.
Okay.
We look at the hybridization of teaching and learning, right? Online courses, online services made available to remote students or all students for the sake of convenience. A technological interface, like I want to take a day off. I go to my Fordham portal and I go to this calendar and I click, and then my supervisor approves that day off. If I want to travel, it's the same situation. So let's imagine a couple of years ago, I wanted to go to a conference. I would go to the vice president at that time that I reported to, and we would chat about the conference. Hey, it's going to be this, and this is what I want to do, and here's the website, or I got this email about it. This is my presentation. Oh, really? Tell me more about that. And then they would sign this form, and off I would go, and I'd come back from the conference, and they'd ask me, hey, tell me about that conference. I'm like, oh, it was so great, blah, blah, blah. Or I don't know, maybe it wasn't. Now I just go to a website, I click a thing in the calendar and it sends an email to get permission and I get a yes or no, and that's that.
Do you follow that woman on TikTok who does her name is, she calls herself Erin from corporate?
Yeah.
And she does these TikToks about being from corporate, and it's all about portals. And so someone says, I have a problem because I was going to take a vacation, but I got sick. And she said, you have to go to the transferring sickness to vacation days portal. And that's part of and she is this
Yeah.
hilarious, endless font of names of portals. So there's no thing. It's like the broken shoelace portal. There's no thing that you can, I don't want to eat my lunch at my desk portal. Then she's like, this portal can't be accessed
Right.
until you have access to this other portal and you've got to sign in for that. And Debbie's on vacation, so she can't give you so these portals are really, they govern our life.
So we work with and through technology, and
Yep.
it has effects on the social, cultural life of and political life, obviously, too, of the organization. So if we can just stay in this space for a moment where I drove onto campus the other day and I think they were testing this little robot that mows the lawn.
Oh, cool.
So
Wild.
it's really cool, but that's like technology. So someone has to select that, identify the vendors, think about the software, who's going to support it, what are the licenses. The more we use technology, then the more IT expands to
Yes.
touch everything that happens. Right. And I'm not saying this in any kind of sinister way. This is just how we do things now in a technologically integrated world.
I served on a committee. I know you've been on this committee as well. That's a cybersecurity committee for the university,
Mhm.
right? And the first time I went to one of those meetings, I my eyes were open to a whole raft of global issues around cybersecurity. So I had been thinking about the security of my computer absolutely in a kind of atomized way for myself as an individual faculty member, without recognizing that actually it's important that as a university, we have a cybersecurity professional whose job it is to think about what would happen if some fool like me clicks on a dumb link and takes down the library website or introduces some malware that messes up our learning management system.
Bearing in mind now, holding in our heads what you said about the provosts,
Yep.
their travels through the academic life of the institution. I'm wondering if the provost knows or cares about the robot lawnmower. Who would care about this? Certainly the head of facilities, but ultimately IT would probably know because of exactly what you're saying. Right? This robot is going to probably be wireless, so it's going to
Right.
touch the network. So the CIO has to know. There's a new student hub where students can access like all kinds of things. Their class schedule, they can register for courses, they can understand about their bursar situation, financial aid, all kinds of things. And because that's again, that's the technology, the CIO's involved. He himself or herself are not personally designing the app, but they have an awareness that's very deep, I would imagine. It's certainly at the inception of this kind of really pretty radical transformation of student life.
Right.
So if we think about then who has the broadest view from the operational level in most, if not all, aspects of university life, that might be the CIO,
Interesting.
because
Okay.
technology is integrated everywhere. Just like they know the technology of the classroom, they don't necessarily know the content that's taught in the classroom. Yes, but they
Correct.
facilitate the teaching and learning that happens in that physical space. So at least they need some awareness.
Right. And there was a time, I've been at Fordham 20 years now, and there was a time when I arrived when you had to request a classroom that had the capacity to show video or to show a PowerPoint. So now every classroom, at some point, someone had to make the decision that every classroom has that ability. It's not going to be long before whatever it is that we did to those classrooms 10 years ago is going to be obsolete, and then we're going to have to make a new upgrade, and we're
Right.
going to have to decide, does that come online one building at a time, all over one summer, bit by special request, and that's a
It's always
CIO type
happening, right?
question.
I
Right.
told the story to you before where I was asked to teach in a new classroom. It wasn't because of me, it was just they assigned me this classroom. So I go in there, it's brand new. The chair desks are arranged in semicircles facing this dais, and they in levels. And I'm thinking, okay, am I Mark Antony? What am I doing here? So, and who designed this? So someone had an idea of what teaching looks like, and they reified it in the built environment. And I had to adjust my teaching to fit that space.
No, let's get your chairs in a circle.
No, we fought against it. So
Yep.
sometimes we find ourselves fighting against, in this example, the physical space, but also technologically mediated spaces, because we're not, as teachers, really making those kinds of decisions. But yet the decisions that are made with regard to instructional technology, as an example, have real powerful consequences.
So as you're noticing the perspective, the expanse of the perspective of the chief information officer, and potentially the expanse of the remit of the CIO, right? That's what's making you curious curious about or interested in this idea of leadership, because you're thinking about chief information officers as people who have maybe a bigger, a more authoritative, a more influential leadership role than they might have had before. Am I right in?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think through. You have so going back to what you described about an academic who rises up, if that's the right way to frame it, I guess
Mhm.
metaphorically rises up through the ranks, and your editorial comments about thinking that the classroom is the center of the university universe. I just noticed that. The college, we've talked about this before, the idea of when you think about college, what do you think of? And I'm thinking here specifically as an undergrad, right? It could
Right.
be you fell in love, you went on a mission trip, you hanging out on the quad, you went to a toga party, you had a deep and lasting friendships that persist decades later. Class is in there somewhere, but it might not be in the top five. Because the university in which a course is nested, it's thousands of years old, right? A lot of people spent a lot of time figuring out what this place is going to be. And there's really nothing else like it, where people sequester themselves away from their regular lives and focus just solely on their own personal development and transformation.
Right.
Let's say you can start college a semester early. This is a program we're going to integrate freshmen into the college, but they're not going to take class. They're going to join clubs. We're going to host events where they make friends. So we're going to reduce the social anxiety
Okay.
before they have to learn. And I imagine this can't be my idea. Somebody's got to be doing this somewhere. So that would be college without class. As a person who went to college, I had semesters where I went to class very little.
Mm.
And during the pandemic, we had class without college,
Right.
which is traumatic. It's just horrifying what we put those poor students through. All they had was access to their professors. That's horrifying.
What
So
could be worse?
exactly. So when we think of as class being the center of the university, I'm not sure that's widely held.
Right.
Right. because we stripped
Uh,
class.
you're making me really sad. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I just feel sad. Because the class is the center of my life.
Right. So I'm going to push this point. I hope it doesn't get me into trouble. So let's imagine you're choosing the leadership of an academic institution.
Mhm.
We strategically, we're thinking this through now, just you and me and the listeners at home and around the world. Who would we pick? A person who sees the academic life as the center of the universe of college, right? The classroom, the teaching, the research, or someone who understands the broader scope of everything that happens, not with any great depth, which is problematic in certain ways. We touched upon that with the built environment issues in the classroom, but just really understands everything that happens. They have to because of the technological layer that makes all kinds of different work possible. So what I learned about recently is a position called the Chief Learning Officer, the CLO. So the
Okay, that's
CIO,
totally new to me. I've never heard that.
CIO, Chief Information Officer, CFO,
Right,
Chief Financial Officer, CLO, Chief Learning Officer. So this involves training programs, initiatives, employee skills like upskilling of employees and performance and that kind of stuff, but also faculty development, curriculum enhancement, and other initiatives like maybe starting a center for teaching and learning,
right.
maybe building communities of inquiry and community of practice around integrating research or into teaching or multidisciplinarity or whatever that might be. So that person may be peeling off the ed tech sector from IT, who can, technical infrastructure and security issues, perhaps, but also maybe that person emerged from the academic side to some degree. Maybe they're
Mhm.
a faculty member, right? So I think it's trying to like Frankenstein these two perspectives into one role to create a new structure.
So when you talk about chief learning officers, of course, as you can imagine, that's super interesting to me. That sounds like a fun and important job. When you talk about chief information officers potentially being stronger, better, having a more 10,000 feet view than a provost who only has a view of the academic side, that makes me super itchy and nervous. I understand the logic behind it, but I don't like it.
Yeah, because
But that's not doesn't mean it's not worth talking about. It's precisely makes it worth talking about. But I just wanna.
yeah, I guess we're trying to map what we're going to struggle with in this season. We can dig much more deeply. This is a surface level beginning, trying to formulate our own thoughts. And I see this episode as a provocation, right? What are the implications of this? What does this mean?
And consider me provoked, right? So I think that's good.
I guess we're thinking about the structures of leadership in higher education in a very sort of basic, simple way. And so this season, I'm hoping to have conversations with leaders of various sorts. So maybe leaders of IT and higher ed, maybe leaders in what we call the business world, maybe
Mm.
academic leaders. There are all
Mhm.
kinds. It might be spiritual leaders, because I think a lot of, as you mentioned, because deans don't go to dean school, CIOs may not go to CIO school in any formalized way. Their degrees may be technological.
I think that's something that's fascinating about this topic in this context, which is to say that here we are, an institution that's dedicated to the proposition that everything can be learned and that the way that we learn is by gathering together in a community led by experts, and we're led by people who haven't studied the thing leadership. We're led by people who haven't studied what it means to be a CIO. We're led by people who haven't studied organizational management, but they're sociologists and English professors and Portuguese language experts. And then all of a sudden they become a dean and their job is completely different, right? It's not about teaching declensions. It's about speaking to a faculty member who maybe ought to be encouraged to think about considering retirement sometime in the next minute. And those are very delicate conversations that we don't have a lot of training for.
Well, I mean, and then you're hitting on the tension between formal and informal learning.
Yes.
And for institutions of privileged formal learning, we're also elevating informal learning in our leaders.
Right.
And maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. Should we formalize that kind of learning?
Not everything has to be a degree. You don't need a
Right.
certificate in every single thing in order to do it.
We're an organization that sells certificates, so I would gently push back on the idea that you don't need them.
William James has that great essay, The PhD Octopus. It's just everything's a PhD now. He's writing in 1898. There are too many PhDs.
We usually ask, who's your favorite teacher? But since we're talking about leadership this year, Anne, can you think of a leader? Could be anybody. Could be your mom, could be a president, could be any leader you've experienced in your life. That really, the word leader, who do you think of?
Okay, this is embarrassing, or maybe not embarrassing. I grew up just absolutely revering Lincoln. There were like 40 Lincoln biographies in my house. And then I came to feel like it was a little bit embarrassing to have Lincoln as a hero. And then the other day, I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about models of masculinity. And one of the hosts of the podcast said, Lincoln was really good at modeling listening and empathetic care, and he held office hours for the citizens and listened to their problems, and that helped him keep in touch with the ordinary concerns of ordinary Americans, even as he was in the White House. And I was like, I felt so excited and vindicated because I had a renewed reason to think about Abraham Lincoln as like a great leader in a difficult time, who was a great writer, who also was modeling a non-toxic model of masculinity, an empathetic style of leadership. So I'm like back on the Lincoln train. It's not very controversial or very original, but there you go.
Reclaiming Lincoln. That's great.
Reclaiming Lincoln. I know, it's a big headline.
All right, I'm going to hold on to my favorite leader, because
oh, you're such a tease.
Well,
okay.
we need people to tune in to the future.
Well, stay tuned for episode 2. We can't wait to have you listeners back, and I can't wait to talk more about this topic. I think it's going to be a great season, and I'm really looking forward to talking to some of these great guests that we have lined up. So thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Anne. Twice Over Podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spotify, with new episodes appearing each week. For host and guest bios and show notes, please visit our website, twiceoverpodcast.com. You can email us at twiceoverpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening.